Hello there, and welcome to Creatives Processing, the podcast where creatives reveal their process and process what it means to create. I'm your host, Sarah Mulligan Williams, and in this highlights episode, I'm sharing 3 moments from my conversation with Joan LeMay. Joan's story is a beautiful reminder that creative careers rarely follow straight lines. She's made her mark across multiple disciplines. She's relentlessly honest about the business side of creativity. From running a music publicity firm to co-creating the Quantum Criminals book, Joan built her entire career on a whole lot of hustle and vision. In this episode, we'll cover how a pandemic fanzine project became a critically acclaimed book series, why too much transparency can actually kill your business, and her perspective on AI and the inherent value of human-made art. Between each clip, some reflections from me on why Joan's perspective resonates with my own work. Let's start with the origin story of Quantum Criminals, her book on Steely Dan, which was a total dream project for Joan.
Steely Dan has always been my favorite band. It's always my pat answer to who is your favorite band? What is your favorite band? So I was like, what can I make a fanzine about? And I thought Steely Dan, because there are a zillion named characters in their songs. There are a zillion session players. I'm primarily a portraitist, and so I wanted to do a big project that was people instead of objects, because I'd also just done made 2 fanzines that were about objects, and so that was where the idea was, and I only got so far as the cover and making the list of characters and players, and I got a call, and I posted about it on Instagram, and I got a call from my dear friend, the brilliant Jessica Hopper, who is an acquiring editor at the University of Texas Press. She called me and she said, "Joni, that's not a fanzine, that's a book." And I was like, "Wait, what now?" And so she had been in talks with Alex, who obviously brilliant for my money, the best music writer working today, the best culture writer working today, the smartest, the most insightful, the most creative. I'd known him loosely for decades because of having been a music publicist. But that's how we knew each other, was I would pitch him something and he'd be like, "Not today." And I'd be like, "Okay, thanks." He had been speaking with her about doing something on Steely Dan, but he didn't know what shape he wanted it to take. He didn't know. So with my format, Jessica put the 2 of us together and said, "Y'all are going to make a book." And I said, "Great." So all of a sudden, Alex and I had a book deal together, and we were both fucking thrilled, and started talking and dreaming out what we wanted this thing to be. Our lives both changed a lot between the making, between the making of the last book and now. And so just in terms of what my life logistically and personally has been, and my capacity, that it changed my process, and principally how it was different for me is that I went into this really not knowing much about the dead, and it's going to be really interesting. This was my time to really dive in, and it's going to be really interesting talking about that more, as we don't have a publication date yet. I don't know when, hopefully sometime in 2026, I would think. But when the actual press cycle for that book starts, it's going to be interesting us talking about that, because I know a lot of, Dead fans are really passionate people, just like Dan fans are really passionate people, and I can go toe to toe with Steely Dan nerds any day. I cannot with dead nerds. Anybody's going to have me licked. I was more interested in the. I approached all these paintings and all this work from a new and curious kind of and fresh kind of standpoint. And I also, one thing that I did towards the beginning of the process was sought out models, which is something I didn't do for the Dan book, but in the spirit of the dead, because in the spirit of having a big inclusive community, which is so much of what that band is about, is the culture around them. I wanted to have that be present in my paintings, so I sought out people who were fans to model for me as particular characters who I would then paint. So there was a big process with that as well that was very different. I just made stuff up, and with the Dan book, I used myself as a model because it was also the pandemic, and so I would take pictures of myself, whatevering, and stick another head on my body or change my whatever. And so that was a very different thing.
Now, when you were working with models for this, because I'm between like the Dan and the Dead, like again, like lots of characters in their songs, and was it just the descriptions of these characters in the songs that were informing what the subjects look like, or was it coming from you? Were the subjects, especially with the Grateful Dead portraits, were those also being fed to from the fans themselves, like their interpretation of what that character would look like?
Partially, yeah. I mean, I would give folks instructions of like, can you look? It was like kind of like being a casting agent or something. Where I was like, can you look really pained? Can you look, because I would be illustrating a particular line, but in terms of the feel of like who do I paint? Who are the characters that fans want to see? Who's important? Alex was it. Alex made the list because he is a massive, very knowledgeable Dead fan. And so I took cues from him on who do I paint, what's your take on this character, what's the general vibe. So from talking with him, listening to the songs, looking at the lyrics, and then emailing people and asking them to basically give me a performance of some sort, and then taking those photographs and painting from those photographs. It was kind of a multi. It was a more in-depth research process for me because I was coming in fresh, and it's important to me that that I was coming to my own conclusion about who I thought these people were and what I thought they looked like, but that those ideas were also community informed, and that I wasn't totally off base and being a ding dong,
Man, what a dream project. Joan has been a fan of Steely Dan since she was 2 years old. Imagine getting to create something about your favorite band by immortalizing them artistically. What a dream, seriously. But you know what gets me about Joan's story? It's not just that Jessica Hopper called and said, "That's a book, girl," though that moment was obviously huge. It's what Joan was already doing before that call came. She was making the work, she was posting about the work, she was building in public, even when the project was just a fanzine that hadn't gone anywhere yet. We're often waiting for someone to give us permission. Permission to call ourselves artists, permission to charge what we're worth, permission to take our work seriously. But the breakthrough moments come when we're already doing the work, when we've given permission to ourselves, when we're already showing up. And it's hard to put yourself out there. Joan's evolution from the Steely Dan book to the Grateful Dead book shows something crucial, that your process needs to evolve with each project, that every project teaches you something about how to approach the next one. That the goal isn't to find one perfect process and stick to it forever. It's to stay curious about how you can serve the work better. So here's what I want you to think about. What are you making right now that you're just treating as just a small thing? What would change if you gave it the same seriousness and attention you would give to your dream project? Next, let's talk about something every creative person, I imagine, is navigating right now: how to survive in a market that's increasingly tough.
I don't know anybody in America who isn't kind of, fighting off the instinct to really be living in a scarcity mindset. And I think it's really that their life is getting more and more and more expensive. The job market is really tough. And art is, at the end of the day, a luxury purchase. I don't, in terms of competition with AI or competition with painters on Etsy who will make a small portrait for $30 or something like that. I don't actually see that as something that is impacting my level of stuff. And I don't mean level as in like, I'm so great. It's just, I think it's a different
market.
It's a different market. It's a different person. Like there's, I think the person who wants a pillow with their kid's face on it is different than the person who wants to pay $1,000 to have somebody whose art they connect with and who they're a fan of or whatever, paint their child, or somebody who they have a personal connection with, paint their child. I think there's, every human artist has a story, and there's inherent value in the work because the work is being made by that artist. It's the whole thing of like, I don't know. There's the Picasso's I'm not fucking Picasso, but there's like Picasso's at a cafe, and they give him a check, they give him a bill, and he does just a little scribble on a napkin, and he's like, here, anybody else does that. I do that. If I go to a cafe and they give me a bill and I scribble on a napkin, I'm like, here, they're going to tell me, fuck off, give me $40.
If you pay me. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But, so it's there's the, it's a whole other giant conversation. What is the value of art? What is the monetary value of art? What is blah, 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 blah. But I don't, without going down that wormhole, I don't really see that customer being the same person as a patron who's really looking for a particular artist to make something that they're going to have forever, and really invest a lot of money into and wait for to have a hand in making. But I think, everybody I talk to is like, man, it's slow.
Joan's distinction between different markets is so important to understand right now. There's a lot of anxiety in the creative community about AI, cheap services on Etsy or Fiverr, being undercut or replaced. Like, I get it. The anxiety is real. But Joan's point is crucial. that those weren't your clients to begin with. They never were. The person who wants speed and low cost, they're not wrong for wanting that, but they're also not looking for what you offer. This is where a lot of creatives get stuck, trying to compete on price or speed, when what actually makes your work valuable is your perspective, your process, and your story. Joan's right that everyone's struggling right now. The market is really tough, but doubling down on what makes you irreplaceable, your human perspective, your relationships, your unique approach, that's what gets you through. This next and final clip is a really important business lesson Joan learned about the hard way, about transparency, information overload, and what actually helps potential clients say yes.
I have a process in terms of, process pricing, timeline stuff. And I messed with that format this year to see, because you have to, it's important when you have a hunch that you should change things up, that you try some different things. And I changed how I'm communicating about commissions on my site and built this whole page with really a lot of information about it, and a lot of information about the process, and even a contract, because I used contracts my entire career as a publicist. I have rarely used contracts as a visual artist unless it's for a commercial project, which I do, illustrations for magazines and if I'm making a painting for a company or something, or if I, there will be contract. There are instances in which things are written down by contract, but I have been a lot more casual about it. Anyway, I put all this stuff up on my site, and my inquiries completely died. Like, stuff just stopped. And
So it's so interesting, because I want to know, what was the hunch that made you want to be more transparent and clear about your process, pricing, and everything?
Mm-hmm.
And because when you posted about that, I had already had you on my list of people to reach out to for the podcast. But once you posted that, I was like, oh, this is exactly the sort of shit that I want to talk about, because it's
nice.
Being so transparent about it is, I'm not in the fine art world. I don't get fine art commissioned. So seeing a fine artist like yourself be so transparent about that, is that not the norm within that field?
I have no idea what is and what is not considered the norm, really, right now. I'm not sure at this particular moment if there is necessarily a norm. But I had conversations with a few other painters and a few other illustrators, and they shared their processes with me. I've heard for years and years and years, like, why aren't you doing bigger ticket, larger scale commissions? I'm like, I would love to. I would absolutely love to. It just hasn't happened. And I think part of why it hasn't happened, I put in quotes, is goes back to the thing we were talking about before, where I'm doing a lot of different stuff. And I want to do it all, but you can't do it all. So I think there was one particular painter who was very generous with me and sent me she said, this is what's on my site. This is my slideshow that I send. She has a PowerPoint that she sends to clients. And she was like, just copy that and just, do it. And I was like, great, thanks, man. And I more or less did, but with the parameters I was already working with, with my information about what my rates are and what my timeline generally is, and and all that stuff. But I think, I also have been in marketing in various ways for 90 million years. My day job is I work for a company called 20 by 200 that sells fine art prints and art objects. And I handle their social media, newsletters, and things like that. Thinking marketing wise and thinking business wise, because you have to. I think that the approach of forefronting a lot of information didn't work for me in my case, because it's not how I had previously done things, and the amount of information I shared was and is, because I still need to update my site, which I'm going to do and change this out. I think it's too much information. I think it's overwhelming. I think you look at it and you're like, oh my God, this is a lot. This is because I'm laying out all the steps. I'm like, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. Because I wondered if it would be interesting or useful to people who are thinking about commissioning a piece to really understand how what the steps are, how it goes, all that stuff. But turns out it was my inquiries stopped completely.
This one hits home. Joan put in all of this effort into being transparent. Detailed process breakdowns, clear pricing tiers right there on the website, and her inquiries completely died. There's this instinct, especially when you've been in the creative industry for a while, to want to educate people, to show them exactly how the sausage gets made, to prove you're a professional and you're organized and worth the investment, kind of like what I'm doing right now with this podcast experiment. But what Joan learned, that too much information can be overwhelming. It's a balance that I think about constantly in my own work. Like, how much information does a client actually need at each stage? When I send a project proposal, I'm not laying out every single step from kickoff to delivery, but I'm giving them enough to understand what we're doing and why it matters. And I'm leaving room for the human conversation that builds trust. Joan's story reminds me of why I love making this podcast. It's not just about celebrating creative work, but it's about getting real about what it actually takes to sustain a creative life. The hustle, the pivots, the experiments that fail, the moments where everything clicks. I love it. If Joan's journey resonated with you, I really encourage you to listen to the full conversation. We dive deep into her punk rock origins, her 17 years as a music publicist, her recovery from open heart surgery, and so much more about what it means to persevere as an artist. There's a link to it in the show notes where you can also find Joan's work, how to follow Creatives Processing, and info about my creative studio Word of Mouth, where I partner with mission-driven organizations on strategic branding, design, and consulting. Thank you so much for listening. Till next time, stay human, stay curious.